Welcome back to another episode of Pixel Peak. Thank you so much for tuning in during these difficult times.
We hope you enjoyed Wednesday's special quarantine episode and the Smash Bros. Special that aired a week ago. If you haven't seen them yet, you can check them out on AppTV's YouTube channel.
After this week's episode, of course, because we have a lot of news to cover, Nintendo is coming through after the Switch shortage around the world, and company executives gave us a few statements.
Right after our analysis last week, PlayStation revealed the design and features of the PlayStation 5 controller. Instead of DualShock 5, they're calling it the DualSense. Stay tuned to hear all about the new controller additions for Sony's next generation console.
And in the midst of the pandemic, Google has loosened their grip on the Stadia, letting anyone with a Google account to play for free. We'll fill you in on these details before wrapping up the news for the week.
For this week's game review, I'm actually tackling the recently released Resident Evil 3 remake. For now, let's just say it was very timely. If you're interested in action and survival horror in HD, you'll want to stick around.
The game industry has slowed down significantly in the past month, so for this week's analysis, we're having a discussion with the producers and Xbox analyst, Bobby Paget, on video game remakes, re-releases, and remasters.
Sounds like we have a lot to cover, so let's dive into this week's episode. I'm Kristen Lawrence.
And I'm Bryce Gates, and we hope you enjoy your stay here
on Pixel Peak. Microsoft has announced all internal and external events will change to a digital model until next summer in order to prevent the spreading of coronavirus. Last week, the company confirmed that all 2020 events would be digital only. However, now the email suggests this will last through July 2021. The email was shared by Microsoft MVP and community contributor Jenny Coffey via Twitter, which read, "In light of the challenges presented by COVID-19, Microsoft has been closely monitoring the developing global situation and reassessing the overall company-wide in-person event strategy. As a company, Microsoft has made the decision to transition all external and internal events to a digital-first experience through July 2021. It's not clear how this will affect Xbox events, although the platform holder has already been experimenting with delivering news through its Inside Xbox broadcast, with another due to air later today. It's potentially a blow to E3 2020, as this year's show was canceled due to COVID-19 concerns, although Microsoft is one of the publishers that has promised to run a digital presentation instead."
Xbox shared details on new plans to bring a preview of the gaming stream service Project X Cloud to Europe, but the showcase depends on the measures to fight COVID-19. Originally announced in November and heading to Western Europe, Microsoft shared the first 11 countries slated to receive it. These countries include Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Spain, and Sweden. In a blog post, Microsoft emphasized that it would release the service cautiously in order to avoid adding stress to the internet infrastructure caused by the pandemic. Catherine Gluckstein, Project X Cloud's general manager and head of product, commented saying, "We know gaming is an important way for people to remain connected, particularly during these times of social distancing. But we also recognize how internet bandwidth has been impacted with the strain on regional networks as large volumes of people responsibly staying home and go online." She added, "With that in mind, we continue to evaluate the COVID-19 situation, and we'll begin rolling out Project X Cloud's preview across 11 Western European countries when we are confident it is sensible to do so. We will take a measured approach to help conserve internet access beginning in the preview in each market with a limited number of people and adding more participants over time. Registrations are now open to Android users in all 11 markets, and players will receive a notification email when the system is ready to try.
The availability of Nintendo Switches are now plummeting worldwide, and Nintendo is determined to get more in stock before they run out. In Japan, the only people able to get the Nintendo Switch now are people who have it reserved. For others, that item is listed as delayed. While over in Europe and the US, the Switch and its physical games are almost entirely sold out, with the Nintendo Switch Lite being the only Switch with some availability left. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic and people having to stay indoors, the demands for the console have gone through the roof as people find ways to occupy their time inside. The sales for the Nintendo Switch have increased by more than 150% in March. But due to the pandemic, the manufacturing of consoles has been disrupted. Factories in China are slowly starting to reopen to increase worldwide stock of the Switch console. The US representative of Nintendo has stated Nintendo Switch hardware is selling out at various retail locations in the US, but more systems are on the way. We apologize for any inconvenience. For the UK, they have stated that they still have some Nintendo Switch Lites, and people are wanting to switch over other gaming consoles like the Xbox or PS4 when they want something to play on the TV with their kids. Regardless of this preference, all other gaming systems are also in low stock.
Over 50 companies has pledged support to the hashtag Play Apart Together initiative, and possibly 70 more will be joining them. The Play Apart Together initiative is a campaign where gaming companies from around the world encourage their users' networks to follow the safety guidelines for the pandemic, such as social distancing, hand hygiene, and other preventative actions. It originally started with 18 companies: Riot Games, Activision, Blizzard, and Unity, to name a few. Some of the newer companies to join the cause are CCP Games, Facebook Gaming, Sega, and Oculus Gaming. Through the initiative, they have also hosted special in-game events, activities, and rewards with encouraging players to adopt the best practices for health and safety for themselves, their families, and the community. The CEO of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick, has stated the following: "It's never been more critical to ensure people to stay safely connected to one another. Games are the perfect platform because they connect people through the lens of joy, purpose, and meaning. We are proud to be participating in such a worthwhile and necessary initiative. Hashtag Play Apart Together is just one of the many ways the game industry has united to fight the coronavirus, and many of the companies involved are donating money and essential equipment to the frontline workers."
The PlayStation 5 will have a redesigned controller called the DualSense, revealed last Tuesday. The new controller will feature a new design as well as new features such as haptic feedback, adaptive triggers, and a built-in microphone array. Hideki Nishino, Senior Vice President of Platform Planning and Management at Sony Interactive Entertainment, commented on the triggers, saying, "We also incorporated adaptive triggers into the L2 and R2 buttons of DualSense, so you can truly feel the tension of your actions, like when drawing a bow to shoot an arrow. Instead of a share button, Sony is instead replacing it with a create button," commenting, "With Create, we're once again pioneering new ways for players to create epic gameplay content to share with the world, or just to enjoy for themselves. We'll have more details on this feature as we get closer to launch." President and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, Jim Ryan, commented saying, "DualSense marks a radical departure from our previous controller offerings and captures just how strongly we feel about making a generational leap with PS5. The new controller, along with the many innovative features in PS5, will be transformative for games, continuing our mission at PlayStation to push the boundaries of play now and in the future." Ryan recommitted to the holiday 2020 launch window for the PlayStation 5 and promised to share more information, including the console design, in the coming months.
Announced by Google Stadia on Wednesday, They have made the Stadia free for all those with the Gmail address. To sweeten the deal, new users for the Stadia Pro will get 2 months for free, as well as access to 9 different games. The 9 games are Destiny 2 The Collection, Grid, Guild SteamWorld, Dig 2, SteamWorld Quest, Hand of Gilgamesh, Serious Sam Collection, Splitlinks, Stacks on Stacks on Stacks, and Thumper. It has also been said by Google that the current Stadia Pro members will not be charged for the next 2 months. After the 2 months free period, the monthly cost will be $10. Members can cancel their subscription if they so wish. In the past, to get access to the Stadia, it is required to purchase the $129 Google Stadia Premier Edition, which is a bundle that includes a Chromecast Ultra, a wireless Stadia controller, and 3 months of Stadia Pro. As of April 8th, access to the Google Stadia has changed, with the base level version of the Stadia being free for those who sign up on their website. Users will still have to purchase games on their own, but the games can be played on different devices such as a PC, Chrome OS tablets, and Google Pixel phone, as well as other smart devices. The wireless Stadia controller is also now not required, as users can play now with their mouse and their keyboard. But that's going to be all for this week's news, so I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to Kristen for this week's game review.
This pandemic has spread faster than any disease in modern history.
Angry mobs roam the city, burning buildings.
Authorities are bracing for more rioting
There are
tonight.
fires burning. There are people being.
He was knocked unconscious in some
A citywide emergency has been declared.
The CDC has quarantined the lower Midwestern region of the U.S.
Commitment, honesty, integrity, these are the core values that create the foundation for Umbrella. It's this foundation that will continue to build a brighter future for all of us.
Resident Evil 3's remake has quite a different opening than the original. This sets the atmosphere for the game and is quite eerie, especially now, focusing on the disease that causes the outbreak in Resident Evil 3, the T-Virus. The setting is once again Raccoon City, taking place a little before and during the same time period as Resident Evil 2. You play as STARS officer and recurring character Jill Valentine, with occasional gameplay as Carlos, who you befriend early on despite him working under Umbrella Corps. All Jill wants to do is get the word out about Umbrella Corps and save the citizens of her home of RC. The goal of the game is for Jill to find an experimental vaccine for the T-Virus and get out of Raccoon City. Unfortunately, the path is made far more treacherous by hordes of zombies and Umbrella creations, including the behemoth mutant Nemesis. If you've played Resident Evil 2, Nemesis is quite like Mr. X, a seemingly undefeatable looming threat that stalks you throughout the game. Nemesis, however, has access to weapons in addition to its brute strength. The game has similar controls to the RE2 remake, which are pretty solid. The absence of the knife breakaway tactic is very bemoaned, though. Resident Evil 3 actually takes place across many different locations throughout the city. The downtown, subway, sewer, the Raccoon Police Station, the hospital, and Umbrella's headquarters being the main areas. You actually don't get to see much of the exterior of Raccoon City, though. The one time you're outside is when you're downtown, and there are many strategically placed cars and debris to make sure you never wander off the beaten path. The maps for most places in the game are sprawling, for better or for worse. I have never relied on a map more in a Resident Evil game, and I still got lost twice. That said, the game seems to make up for its lack of puzzles and substance by trying to make the areas larger and more winding. The game doesn't really have anything like the statue puzzles in Resident Evil 2, the closest thing being an optional function in the beginning that kind of acts more like a vending machine. It seems padded for time towards the end, with little happening but trying to find your way through hallways and back to fetch various items. By the way, the game takes only an average of 4 to 6 hours to play, which is astonishingly short. I finished in 5 hours and 35 minutes. It started to feel quite tedious, if I'm being honest. I got so frustrated just trying to find my way through one section that I had to take a break. Some of the positives about the game are, of course, the beautiful graphics, which makes everything far more scary and disturbing than perhaps the original. I only caught one instance where objects in the distance lagged a little behind. Other than that, they're magnificent. I'm used to finding a horrifying amount of graphical errors and glitches in horror games, but this is not one of them. Nemesis is intimidating, and they make sure that you appreciate it by seeing him as much as possible. The game has several callbacks and connections to Resident Evil 2, which is quite nice to see. Carlos and Jill are developed just enough to become dear to the player. My takeaway is that the game is a short spectacle with sprawling maps and a lack of substance. I rate it probably a 7 out of 10 if I'm being generous. I just had way better expectations for the series, and while it looks great for a remake, as a current game it's lacking and boring. It's not bad, but it's not great either, and has less of the replayability of the Resident Evil 2 remake.
The trend of remakes, remasters, and re-releases is still going strong. Let's talk about them.
One of the things I found, because I've been playing the Yakuza series recently, is that with the remaster collection, with like 3, 4, and 5, with 3, there was like, I think like 12% of the content of the original Japanese game got cut for the Western release. And seeing all that being put back in for a re-release is probably one of my favorite things. Like just bringing back anything that was cut out, or like Bianca said, any technical stuff. Because like I know with some of the Yakuza games, originally you had to save at payphones instead of having an autosave feature, but now they've like gone to the autosave feature for releases. So I thought stuff like that is very important.
So how important are remakes and re-releases today? And should these games be more or less prevalent in the future than they are currently?
I think that they are still pretty important. I think, like I said, like nostalgia really plays a big part in like remakes and re-releases. And like I would truly kill for Jak and Daxter 1 to be remade like Spyro was, just because I want to see like what graphics can do now, especially with a game like that I don't think they came out at the exact same time, but like they both had pretty blocky graphics, you know, like the typical like blocks and whatnot as faces and stuff. So I think just adding stuff like that's really, I think doing it is important, and it brings back gamers. Like, I think if Jak and Daxter 1 got remastered, my dad would actually play a video game again. Like, he used to be a really avid video gamer, but then he said video games got too hard. Like, I think the last video game he tried to play was God of War for the PS3. And I remember him throwing the remote and being like, I'm done with this word I can't say. Like, I'm sick of it. Like, I can't play these games anymore. They made them too hard. And so I think remaking and re-releasing like old games like that really means a lot to people who like love those games and stuff. And I mean, I think as for like be more or less prevalent in the future, I think it's doing a pretty good job right now of being just like it's there, games are happening, it's being remastered and it's being re-released, and I think people are happy with the rate it's at. At least from like what I've heard and seen, and for me personally, like I'm not rushing for anyone to remake every game I played or re-release every game I played when I was a kid, you know? Like, I know Animal Crossing New Horizons isn't like a re-release or a remake by any means, it's just another game in the franchise, but you know, you look back on the first Animal Crossing game for the N64 or the one that I started playing on the GameCube, it's fun. It's like cool. It's like, oh, this is almost like a remastered version of the first Animal Crossing, because you're doing the same kind of concept, living and vibing, but with better graphics and stuff, better storyline. So
there's a similar idea in game development, but I feel like the people in game development are more passionate about fan reaction and like fan involvement than like the movie industry is, and I think that's really helped a lot. Like there haven't been that many remasters that were received like poorly, other than the Dark Souls 1 remaster for the PlayStation 4, because it was just like not a lot of effort, or well, I guess it was more than just PlayStation, but just like not a lot of effort was put into remastering it. It was kind of like a re-release, but with all of the same issues as the old game. But yeah, I mean, it just seems like it is a pretty cool thing that most games get it right, and that they can implement like these new features, or if it's a re-release, like fix all the bugs that were in the previous game, and for people to be able to experience what the game was supposed to be back then, or what the original vision for it was without the technical limitation. Like that seems like what a lot of video games are doing, and I think it's pretty cool and important that they're doing that.
So are there any other remakes that have not been mentioned yet that particularly stand out to any of you guys?
So for me, there's the original Resident Evil remake that was done for the GameCube. Basically, that was a remake of the first Resident Evil game, which took what was a fun little campy mess, you know, lines like Jill, the Master of Unlocking, and Jill Sandwich, and hope this is not Chris's blood. Basically, it took all that, it kind of cut down the campiness, but it still kept the scariness of it, because it added things like the Crimson Heads, which are zombies. If you kill a zombie and you go back to a room later with a dead zombie, it comes back to life, significantly harder to kill, and the only way to get it to die forever is to like light it on fire. It's introduced new mechanics that made the game a lot more scarier, and I feel like it kind of helped a new generation that wouldn't necessarily accept the campiness of the 90s B-movie version help accept that first game of the series, and kind of got a lot of people hooked on the series as a whole.
I think one like remake and remaster a lot of people don't really talk about a lot is the Battlefront remasters, with how DICE took over the company, and they've just been able to recreate this whole just different feel in a good way for the Battlefront series, how you've had the original two and now you have the new two and franchises that someone can go back and play for Star Wars fans when they don't necessarily really have like a strong video game fan base there. But I'd also have to say the Master Chief Collection is probably the craziest remaster I've seen, if that makes sense. Because like, you know how like they it released and it was horrible. Like the servers wouldn't work and all the things didn't go very well. But then kind of 343 took over and they just kind of like just went down. They pretty much just redesigned the entire thing, the layout, the just how all the matchmaking worked, and they were just able to recreate a good game. And it kind of just is kind of hard to see how such a great game is also looked over because it's already technically been released, but with pretty much it's a whole new version of the Master Chief Collection, and this is so much better, especially with the additions of Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach. I just feel like it was released a little too ahead of time and rushed.
That's all the time we have for this week's analysis, so let's throw it over to Bryce and Kristen to wrap up this week's show.
And that wraps up this week's episode. Thanks for joining us for another remote production.
We probably still won't have 2 special episodes before the end of next week again, but still make sure to stay up to date with us online by liking and following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PixelPCapTV.
And of course, we'll still be streaming new episodes at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays on AppTV's YouTube channel, watchapptv.com, Sky Best channels 20 and 1020, Spectrum channel 198, and on AppState's campus television channel 23.3.
As always, we couldn't have done this episode together without our incredible crew. Thanks to our writers Jalen Curitan, Rebecca Larson, and our Xbox analyst Bobby Paget, as well as our producers Tanner Mazzell, Elise Taylor, and Sydney Thompson for another great episode.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed your stay here on Pixel Peak.